Hiya, it's Jackie Smerdon here in Dunnock Studio. Tomorrow is Remembrance Day in the UK, and in honour of that I thought we'd paint some poppies. So if you'd like to join in and paint along, that would be fabulous. I'm in Dunnock Studio, which is in the heart of Norfolk, and here we do art with a heart. Everybody's welcome here on this channel, including complete beginners. Even if you've never painted before, do not be afraid to ask any questions. Just pop them in the comments. I love to hear from you. It's fabulous to hear from you. Excuse my my voice. I've got a little bit of a ongoing cough that I think virtually half the country have got at the moment, so I am a little bit hoarse every now and again, but if you can put up with that, let's see if we can paint along together. So I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for coming. So today we're going to paint some poppies, and I'm going to do it slightly differently to the one I previously did, and this is the one. So this one is just a single poppy and some background poppies, nice sky, distant landscape. It's Norfolk, so I'm going to keep the landscape flat. Oh no, I can't say flat, my geography teacher would murder me. Undulating, and for those of you who actually do live or visit Norfolk, you can believe we do actually have some hills. They're very small, of course, but we have glacier made hills, all sorts of things going on in Norfolk. So if you haven't visited, it's not just flat, I promise you. So we're going to mix it up, and I've put 3 poppies in as my main focal area, drawn them in, and I've put some masking fluid over them. Now I've used this fine liner. Ignore the SAA bit because the SAA is now CAS art, but you can get this from anywhere. It has a fine nib on it, so you can almost draw with it. And although it's a little bit fiddly trying to get this back on, because you have to get that little pin back in, it's very handy for doing quick little sketches, very fine lines, rather than having a pot of this is the blue masking fluid pot. Now I've had several of these and they've all gone off over the summer, unfortunately, so I've learnt my lesson, don't buy so much. So I've got to renew my stocks, because a couple of my poor learners have opened a pot and it's solid rubber in the middle, so it's not very pleasant. Anyway, so if you were going to use this, you could use a cocktail stick or a ruling pen or something to make fine lines with. This is just an easy way, and these don't seem to go off as quick because they haven't got such a large air gap in the top. You're not opening a big lid, you're opening a tiny exit hole here, so they do seem to last better. So, and of course you could always fill in. I haven't made life harder for you by leaving just a line, so we're going to paint around these, and that will just help to stop the paint going into those areas. We're painting on a slightly different paper today. This is 100% cotton watercolour. This is by Cadmium, and it's cold pressed, and you see here it says the same thing. It's the usual weight that I use, which is 300 grams per square metre and 140 pounds, which is exactly the same, but it's cotton instead of being made from cellulose, which is wood pulp. So this one will be interesting. Cotton tends to stay damper for longer. It's my last piece, so I better not wreck it. We'll see what happens. So once this is dry, I'm going to put my first washes on. To mix it up a bit, I thought I'd change the sky colour. This is ultramarine blue. Now I'm going to do it in cerulean blue and make it slightly different, maybe a little bit more muted. We'll see how we go. So if you want to have a go at this, you can either do the whole picture or you can just do the poppy itself, just with a little background, and have a play like that. So it'd be quite nice for you to try. So good luck, I hope you enjoy it. So the original painting was in ultramarine blue, so I've decided to go with cerulean, which is a much greenier blue, quite often used in skies. So here's some colour swatches. So that's the original Cerulean, which is quite nice, it's quite bright, but for me it's just a bit too greeny blue for a UK at the moment autumn sky as well. So how did I get it to go from here down to this grey blue, down to this grey blue? If you can see the differences there. Really nice colours for using in the sky. So if we take Cerulean, which is somewhere between blue and blue-green, it's that sort of colour. If I show you it in the palette, before it's actually been mixed with anything, it's this one here, so you can get the idea. This one's already had some red mixed in it, so that gave you the clue that you needed. So you go opposite on your colour wheel, you've got blue, blue-green there, opposite is red, red-orange. Thereabouts, there we go, red, so you got a red orange to orange. Now you can come round a bit to the red, it's not quite opposite, red is opposite a proper green, not a blue green. But even if we imagine that cadmium red, which is in this palette here, cadmium red is already going towards a red orange, isn't it? That's red and there's red orange. So if you use the cadmium red and add a tiny bit to your puddle of cerulean blue, you will dull it down to that sort of blue-grey. If you keep adding the cadmium, you could end up with a really warm, lovely grey there, which is now drying into a beautiful colour that would be lovely under the clouds, etc. So that's a little tip, is get your colour mixing going. Cadmium red, cerulean blue, really simple combination. Everybody's going to have cadmium red in their kit. If you haven't got cerulean blue, you've got a bluey green colour, try it with that. If you try any red you like, any crimson, see what different grey mixes you can get. Makes the sky way more interesting than just a flat blue. And it makes it a little bit less chromatic, a little bit less full of colour, which might not suit your local area. So those are the tones and tints I'm going to use in my sky. So to test whether your masking fluid is dry, just gently tap it with your finger very lightly. Where it's thicker, it might take longer to dry. If it's tacky, but your finger's leaving away cleanly, this is all fairly thin, a little bit thicker over here, so it's slightly wet just over here, but I'm not going over here yet, so that's fine. So I think I can start on the sky now. So for this one I'm going to use a flat brush, which I don't often use. I'm just trying to sort of mix things up a bit, and I'm actually going to dampen my sky first. It doesn't matter if I go over the background landscape, that's absolutely fine. What you've got to try and do is to manage to go in around these flowers without going into the flower itself. It really doesn't matter if you do, but just try and take that moisture to those edges where you've done a well, mine's a wiggly line, yours will probably be a perfect poppy line. In Norfolk we have a railway line called the Poppy line, which is really beautiful, runs along the coast, on the North Norfolk coast. So my sky has now got a nice wash of water over it. I'm looking, you can't really see, I'm looking from the side to make sure I can see shine on all the paper. It's quite hard to see where you've been with water. And that's just going to let that start to sink in. Now this is cotton paper. I don't usually use cotton paper, so it will be interesting for me as much as it will be hilarious for you if this goes horribly wrong. But let's be positive and assume it's not going to go wrong. So I've now got my greyed down blue, but I think I'm just going to have a little bit of the pure blue over here to start with. That's picked up a little bit of the grey I made earlier, but let's see what that looks like. So this is now sort of got to the point where it's a little bit less shiny. It's still a little bit damp, but let's see what happens. So I'm going to run the brightest colour along the top. So then my brush ran out there, can you see? So if I come from the other direction with another load, the brightest colour of the sky is always the one just above your head. Then I'm going to come back in with my greyed down version. Try and leave a few little gaps here and there. Maybe a little bit more random with my brush marks. Now I'm going to pick up some red, mix that in over here. See how grey that is? I'm going to pop that in just into some areas I've already been in. Maybe a little bit down here where this horizon's going to be. Go back in with some of the other blue again. I'm going to bring that blue quite close to the poppies here. So I think it sets off the red really nicely. You can see I've got a puddle of water here. So I'm not going to have that much left in the way of lights here, because the water has took that paint and ran it. So let's have a reverse tilt here. I've got this going away at an angle. This is an interesting way to get some different effects in your sky. Turn it right the way around. So this is why I've taped it down to the board. It gives me a little bit more flexibility. So lesson number 1 is cotton paper takes an awful lot longer to start drying. So I probably needed to have left that quite a bit longer than I did, which is fine. And I'm going to lift that puddle off the edge there. You can just wipe along. That helps you stop getting runbacks, cauliflowers or blooms in the top of your sky, none of which we mind, but we might not want them. So if we don't want them, we just let that towel take that edge away there. So I'm quite liking this grey shadow here. Let's turn it back the other way. So it's a very soft, subtle sky. If I bring it up to the camera, you might be able to see that there's some granulation going on, the way the paint is splitting from the neighbouring red, because there's red in there, remember? So it's a nice, soft, very innocent sky. There's nothing too much going on. Do you know what? I'm going to leave it just as it is, and we'll see what happens. So the next thing I would do is to bring in the background landscape, the trees. Do you remember these? So as soon as I put them in, if the paint behind is still wet, they're going to run into it. But sometimes that gives you some nice effects. The trick is when. So we'll have a little think about how much that needs to dry. Now, if I was going to put the same blue in that I put in at the top, it would just be a bright blue horizon line of trees, which really wouldn't work. So my thoughts are that I need to mix up a slightly thicker grey. So I made that grey earlier with the blue, and I picked up some red. So this time I've done a lot less water. See that warm grey I've made there? But I haven't hardly got any water in this. I've got enough water, but the water is already on the page. And it's cotton paper, so it's holding that water really quite well. Now, I've gone too far with the red there, can you see? So, wash my brush out, pick up the blue. So if you go too far, doesn't matter, go back, add back in the colour you started with. There we go, gone back to the blue side now. Now you could make this darker and add greys and blacks and all sorts of things. You could even add a bit of yellow to really neutralise it. But I quite like a blue-grey in the distance. It's not quite lavender, but it's almost. It's a different sort of grey. If you mix ultramarine and alizarin crimson together, which are basically both on the red side, and the blue is got a bit of red in it and the red's got a bit of blue in it, you get a beautiful violet and a lavender. This is completely the opposite. You've got a cool blue and a really, really warm red, but you still get this interesting grey. It's all about creating something interesting. So I'm going to pop on here and let's just see how far off we are. Are we wrong? Should we have left it a bit longer? Drop that in along here, all the way along behind that poppy there. It's coming down into here as well. It's not looking too bad. I'm going to keep going. If you wanted to get clever, you can wiggle your brush about a little bit higher into the sky, suggesting trees, etc. Go all the way along. Could be whatever you want it to be, but you're not trying to paint detail here. These are the detail. This is what you need here. These are in the distance. And I'm just going to lift out some of this, bearing in mind we're going to have a field going in here, so we don't want these going right down the page. You get the idea. Soften that edge there. We don't want to think hard in the distance particularly. We can go back in and put another layer over this if we want, if it's not strong enough as it dries. It's actually turning into a winter landscape now. Well, this is quite nice. Might use these colours in my winter workshops. This is a lovely colour palette. So these are going to be very late poppies growing in a cool landscape. Right, so I'm going to let that dry a little bit more and then we might add a little bit more into there. Okay, so I'm going back with my mix that's exactly the same. It's still moving on the plate. It's consistency of double cream, well, a little bit more like single cream actually. Whoops, overdid the red again. Let's grab that blue back into it. There we go. It's ever so easy to keep moving your colours either way. That naughty red keeps coming over. It's fine. There we go. So it's quite thick. Probably not thick enough, but we'll see. So I'm going back in across this background. See, it's still quite wet under there. But this is just giving it another layer of interest really. You're suggesting there's something more going on than there actually is. There's no rhyme or reason. You could be careful here. You could paint perfect tree shapes. Remember though, they're going to spread into the paper. They probably won't be spreading quite so much if you're on cold pressed paper made out of wood pulp. But don't worry, just work with the paper you've got. Just add in thicker paint as you go. Don't start off with really wishy-washy paint and then end up putting really washy paint on at the end, because it won't work. You'll end up with a big puddle of grey and it just doesn't work. Again, I'm just lifting out some of this here, wiping my brush, rinsing my brush, lifting out. Try not to get your brush too wet like I just did. There we go. It's going to be interesting up here how this is going to look in the field. I've got to try and keep this edge soft. So I'm actually going to let some of that come down into the field. Don't want a hard edge here. Absolutely, this is the distance. So again, I could go in, make these darker again, but I think I'm going to leave them for now. I really like the effect I've got here. Really like the cool colours, and think I'm definitely going to be using that colour combination again. Okay, so I'm going to start bringing in the field. So going back to our original, something loosely we're working towards. We've got yellow golden field. So how do we get distance into a golden field of yellow? One of the ways you can do it is to use a cool colour in the background and a warm colour in the foreground. So we go to our colour wheel. So we're going to use yellows and oranges in the foreground. So orange and red orange is the warmest part of your colour wheel, and greens and blues are the coolest part. you're working your way away from the red towards the yellow. Before you hit yellow green, you've got a cool yellow, then you've got a yellow orange, then you've got an orange. Do you see? So if we were matching these up to our colours, a yellow orange is cadmium yellow. And let's pop this down over here. I've got palettes everywhere. And a yellow cool yellow is yellow lemon yellow. It's slightly gone green because you can see I've got blue there, yeah. But to make the distance appear further away on the top of that field, I'm going to put a cool lemon yellow followed by a warm cadmium. It will make sense when I do it. So let's pop that in now. Now it's going to mix with this grey, which we've got going on here. So I'm not going to get too hung up over this. You could get really worried about this is all wrong, it's not working well together. If you notice, I've gone on to dry paper this time. Now, there's no rhyme or reason for that. I just felt like it to see how this paper performs. So I've immediately got blooms here because this wet paint is pushing into that drying wash there. So we may or may not like those, but guess what? They're there. So let's encourage a few more. Why not? They want to be there, let's let them go. This is how you start finding out what happens in watercolour. It does its own thing. You have got a bit of control, but not a lot. Says the tutor who's supposed to be helping you. Yes, you've got loads of control. There we go. So that's doing its thing. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to try and stop whatever's happening there because something's happening and it's going to be unique to this picture. I have no control over it. So I'm going to keep going. Now I've switched to my cadmium yellow. Look how red that looks compared with that. I promise you that's just cadmium yellow in there. I know the cameras do trick the colours a little bit. So go right across with that, keeping that edge above nice and soft, mixing with this new yellow. So the yellow's getting stronger and warmer as we come forward. This is all foreground here. I don't want this to be a weak colour. So this is definitely single to double cream consistency. Lots of pigment, puddles of paint. Now switching again, I've got my cadmium yellow and I've popped a hint of red in it, just a little bit. Red's much stronger. Can you see that's a lot more red? And I'm dragging that along the very, very foreground. Very, very front, in the foreground. There we go. To really bring that warmth into the foreground here. Now I could go back over and fiddle and I will spoil what's happening. There's a little mark there where I haven't quite dragged it, so let's gently do that and then stop. I'm not going to touch anything else on there. It's doing its thing. I've got all sorts of blooms coming over here with this lemon yellows pushing back into those blues and those greys. Now that was a complete and utter accident. Now this is cotton paper and that paper was holding moisture in a way that I'm not used to. Look at it go. Do I need to change that, stop that? No, I do not think I do. I'm just leaving it because it's something I could never have created even if I tried my very hardest. So that's going to stay there and we might do a little bit with it once it's dry. It might take a while for that to dry. So we can now work on the poppies. I've just got a little tiny blob of water on my sky because I took my brush straight over the painting, which is what you do when you're squashed in trying to film with a camera over the desk. It's very difficult. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with how this is going so far. It was interesting. We went to Normandy last year to the British War Memorial, and we were over there in June. And if you've never been and you get a chance, it's mind blowing. That's all I'll say on the subject. But absolutely beautiful area. We did see poppies in Normandy. No more than we would see in Norfolk. We get quite a few poppy fields that suddenly spring up. Years ago there was one near Swaffham, absolutely glorious. People were pulling off the main road to stop and look. It was just that fantastic. But my memory of Normandy last June was fields and fields of blue because of the flax plants, the linseed, which of course we grow here as well. And it was just such a beautiful sight. It's very, very, very lovely place for all its history. If you ever get the chance to go, I highly recommend it. The poppies now, and if I come in a bit closer, you can see, excuse me, the complexity of the reds in that poppy. There are orange reds, there are cool reds at the back on the right there, and warm reds. It's all going on. So we're going to try and add that in by not painting it one flat colour. That is the trick, is trying to keep that poppy interesting. So, for instance, we could start our first background wash with a cool crimson, very pale. Now I've still got masking fluid on here, which we'll take off at some point and touch in where we want to get rid of. So I could put this cool red on perhaps in the interior of these poppies where it's darkest and coolest away from the bright lights of the outside. We could try that, couldn't we? See what it looks like. But I'm not going to stop, I'm just going to keep adding. So I'm going to pick up some cadmium red now and drop that in, let it move around the poppy a little bit. Try not to overwork it, drop it in. Don't think about it too much, just get it on there. See what it does. I don't know the intricacies of a poppy. I'm not a botanical artist, so I'm just letting the paint do some work for me. So I think if I put the red at the bottom of the poppy, oops, it's jumped over, never mind, doesn't matter. Pop the red at the bottom like that. Rinse off, pick up this lovely red orange I've made, can you see? And encourage them to mix together, do their own thing. Take some of that around this one. Try and think of linking your shapes together. Notice how all these poppies are touching rather than having them individually. Like so. Just keep going, pulling that in. Pop some of this yellow orange, sorry, red orange, not yellow orange, it's the same thing really, over there, then pop back to the red again underneath. Do you see what I mean? I'm just letting the paint make interesting shapes, blending into itself in different places. So it's not just a flat colour, it's got to be more interesting than that. Well, I think it has anyway. And there's a couple of little white areas showing. There'll be some more when we take the edges off. So I'm quite liking that. So now there's a dark middle in a poppy. Now before I go and grab the black, let's just see what we can do. You can watch me struggle. I'll treat you. So I'm going to pick up some some ultramarine blue, which is the darkest blue I've got in my basic palette. There are darker blues, of course there are. This is a new palette, so you can see it's quite shiny and difficult for the paint to spread out. That's quite common with palettes. I'll pick up some of the red that I've been using because I've already got it. So I've got, oh yeah, I've got sort of a very nice violet there, bit weak, bit on the weak side. Let's get rid of some of this excess water. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of yellow because we want all primaries together in that. My yellow was thicker, so you can see how I've now turned that a gunky brown. That's fine. What I need is more blue, so I'm now stealing off the other palette, which is over here. Pop that blue back in. Oh yeah, nearly. Going almost on the black side, isn't it? So let's pick up some neat red. Yeah, nearly. And then go back to my blue. Work hard. I should use every last bit of this blue up. That's quite nice and dark. So what have I done to make that I've put 3 primaries together, that's it. So it's ultramarine blue because it's much darker than the cerulean we're using, and I used cadmium red because I had it already, and a dab of yellow. So that's a violety, slightly on the violet side if you spread it out. Can you see the blue and the violet coming through? Could add some more yellow back in. Let's just put a touch of orange in to help. There, it's gone greyed it down a bit more. It's a little bit weak, but it's a start. So I'm going to pop that right into the darkest part where this poppy would have a middle. The same with this one. Now it will spread out, it will become way too pale, but this is our underpainting for the poppies and we'll go back into them later. So now that's spreading. Can you see how much that's made a difference? Just by popping that into the middle, you're suggesting the centre is darker, which we know they are. There we go. And all I did was mix 3 primaries together. Didn't have to reach for the black or the grey. I'm not saying you shouldn't, because they're there. If you want to use them, you go for it. Now I'm going to let all of this dry, and I'm going to switch on BBC Sounds and listen to Gary Davis' Sounds of the 80s, just in case you're interested. Right, this is all dried now. I can put the hand on the back of my hand. It doesn't feel damp or cool. So with cotton paper it takes a lot longer to get to this stage than cellulose paper, and obviously it's quite cool today. If it was brilliant hot sunny day it would take a little bit less time, so just work with it, make sure you check. So we've done all of this essentially with a single wash. This is where it merged together. I might go back and do something on here, but in the meantime I'm just taking off this masking fluid. So you can do it with your finger, literally just rubbing along the paper, take it off with your finger. But you might want to try these mask away blocks. They save your fingers really. So you're using, it's like a hard rubber. So literally get the corner of it and it lifts off that masking tape, masking fluid for you without ruining your paper because you're not scrubbing with your finger. Now, some people don't like using these because they are actually quite hard and you can tear your paper with them, but it's about getting a feel for them. So although these are not your fingertips, so you can't feel through them, you do sort of get to know what is a good pressure, what is too much pressure. I haven't ripped the paper with one yet, but I could see how you could. So there we go, that's outlined those poppies. And although that wasn't in my plan to have these poppies outlined in white, I don't dislike that. I think it's quite, it's almost like a stylized poppy. So you could leave them like that if you wanted to. What we'll probably do is soften some of the edges and leave some of the other ones. So yep, quite liking the finish on that. Over here we just had some random blobs of masking fluid with some lines dragged down out of them. Again, you could use this fine liner for that, or you could just use a cocktail stick. People use paper clips they've opened up just to drag fine lines of masking fluid. So now we're going back in to do our final layers, which is the details really. So you can see that although we've uncovered some stems here, they're not very strong. So these flowers are seemingly floating at the moment. There's a bit of masking fluid that I missed because your fingers find things that a block doesn't. It's always worth running your fingers over. So I'm going to just get my colours that I've previously used. Very, very rarely would put a new colour in this late in a painting because you are basically going to sort of jump out of the colours you're in and put something new in, and it will be obvious you've done it. So let's try drop some colour onto these areas. Don't cover all of the white up because that gives you some nice highlights. Mix your reds up again, some of the cadmium red, some of the cadmium red with some yellow in it. So you get those oranges. Don't worry about the shapes being exactly poppy-like. You're suggesting poppies, you're not painting absolute poppies here. So that gives you a feel that there's some poppies in the distance. So the way I've set these poppies, they're on the horizon, therefore they're at my eye level. So it doesn't really work perspectively wise, because that would mean these were going down a hill. But we're not worrying about that. This is just a nice fun picture, just to capture the essence of poppies in a field. That's all we're doing here. So one of the styles of paintings that I really admire and I can't do is where people do still life, etc., and they flatten it so that there's no perspective at all. And I really admire that style, because ultimately we're working on a piece of paper. It isn't there isn't distance in this, whereas we're alluding to the fact there might be. And people who take that away completely and flatten everything, wow, they're so clever. And my brain constantly tries to correct it, so I'm not very good at those. So maybe somebody who is can give me a lesson on that. So I'm now going to take some of that reddy orange using a fairly small round brush. I'm not being super careful here, but I'm just going to take some of this white out, because there's quite a lot in this area, and I don't mind the white sort of on this edge really towards the sky, etc., but I think it's slightly too much, so we're going to break it up and bring those reds and oranges in across this part here. Still quite nice to have that white edge along there, because you can see it even if you put a glaze. So what we're doing here is a glaze. Let's just see if I can go in a little bit closer for you so you can see what I mean. So we're literally glazing a new paint layer over a dry paint layer. So you see what I mean? So where it's orange, I'm adding a bit of pure red. And where it's red, I'm adding a little bit of orange. So just to vary it, see all these colours are varied. So you just do what you think works for you. Leave a few spots of white showing, because they're quite nice. So I'm going to have an orange edge up here. Take all of that white out there, maybe a bit of orange here. It's your painting, you do exactly what you want. Yep, so I've taken away most of that white now, but I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to then come back out again so you can see the whole picture. So they're not quite as obviously outlined in white as they were. These are now drying, so this is a good time to pop some more paint into some areas, which will create those lovely random blooms that you can't control, which suggest complex flowers, where in fact all they are is blobs of paint. So it's quite nice and easy, isn't it? Okay, so going back to our original painting, we haven't put the barley in this one because we haven't planned for that. It's more about the poppies today. So how did I get this sea of poppies in here? So you can see we've done this, we've already done this, we've done some of these blobby bits, but there seems to be more than that going on there. So how did I do that? Well, it's not difficult. You need one of these and one of these, and a brave approach. So do not be scared. So here's my red. I'm going to make it up into a nice reddy orange mix. I'm going to get a bigger brush to do this. So there's my lovely red orange mix. I don't want this to be too weak. This has got to be colourful, because this is our final layer. It's sitting on top of all those lovely translucent layers underneath it. Let's pick up some yellow from over here, drop that in. There we go, that's quite a nice reddy orange mix going on there. It's moving, can you see it's moving around my palette? But it's not very watery, it's just moving. So it's quite thick and quite thick. It's quite rich in colour. It's got water in it, so it's moving, but it's not wishy-washy. There we go, technical term today, wishy-washy. We don't want wishy-washy. The second thing I'm going to get, she says, looking, is a piece of card. So I'm going to drop that about, let's say, there. And that is going to act as a mask. Now the rest of it I'm going to try not to worry about. I'm going to just be random. So I'm going to make my toothbrush damp and then splay off the water that I had on there. So it's damp, but it's not wet. I'm going to pick up some of this colour on the toothbrush, okay? Now, suggestion is you test it first. So what I do is pull it back with my thumb and run along. You get a very fine mist. You can probably barely see that. Now, you might find a different way around of doing it. Some people just literally go like that. It doesn't work for me on this one. Now I'm going to carry on and put these across here on my painting. It's very, very fine. So you're going to struggle to see that at this point. But can you see how some of it's going over here? So if I didn't have that paper there masking it, we'd have a red blotchy sky, which isn't going to work particularly well. Now I've got slightly stronger spray there. Now I'm going to switch to the small brush. I'm going to rinse it out, squeeze it, make sure I've got no other colour in there, load it with paint, bring this mask down a little bit because these are going to be bigger. There we go, across here, covered up, and it's not quite big enough, so I'm going to get my biggest brush. These are all just round brushes. Load it up, loads of pigment, enough water, and let's try that. There we go. It's all over here. A little bit more there. This is a little bit more random. It's quite hard to get these big splodge here. Not worrying about it. It's absolutely fine. Everywhere is covered in paint now, including me. So let's lift that off. There we go. Now you get the impression of what I've done on this one. So you're basically splattering your picture. And again, these really would be completely in the foreground because as you can see, these are all much smaller in the background. So in order to suggest that these are right in front of us, I'm going to bring some stems in at this point. Now, I haven't used any green up to this point, so I could use green, but I would still use the original colours that I had. So for argument's sake, let me get my brush to mix it with. If I used my cool blue, which is the cerulean, which is still in that grey mix there, let's just see what happens if I throw some cadmium into it. Cadmium yellow, that's a very dirty green, so it's not particularly pretty. So let's see what happens if I add some lemon yellow into it. Wow, look at the difference. Zingy green, that one. So that's maybe actually too green for this picture. Depends on what you want. So, but I like the green. I think that's a much nicer green than the cadmium green the cadmium red has made. So I'm going to bring all of that together. Whoops, thought I nearly got my sky then. And then if you've got a green and it's a little bit too bright, to mute it down, you go the opposite on the colour wheel. So I'm going to add a little bit of that cadmium red. So I've got some hiding in here. Just mix that in like so. So can you see how that's greyed it down just a little bit? Now this is quite a weak mix, so it might not be strong enough, but I'm going to try it. So this is a thick brush, so I'll put that down, pick up a liner brush of some sort, a rigger, a liner, fine liner, whatever you want to call them. This is very, very weak paint, but that's not a bad thing. Over here we have got the stems that I masked out earlier. So these stems are white. So ideally I'd leave some of that white showing as a highlight. So I'm going to start right at the bottom here, drag this brush through all these red blobs, which of course will dull the green down even more there, and then come alongside that white line, not trying to do a solid line. We'll see how this goes. Whoops, left my arm went in that side. This is the nature of working like this. There we go, up to the top. I'm being a bit too careful, so let's do a little bit more rough and ready on this one. Don't think about it too much. Go for it. And maybe you have some extra bits coming off there in a minute. We'll go right to the bottom on this one. Let's come the other way, see how that works. Ta-da. Like so. There you go. Oh, that's a big blob there. Let's make him into a little stem. That's better. I haven't got a poppy in front of me as a reference, and if I was doing this properly I probably would have, but they're not actually growing at the moment, so I can't. Could get a photograph, but then I'm starting to copy. Don't want to do that. This is just an impression. So under here I might just suggest that these green shapes are going off under there doing things. There's other things going on behind that we can't see. Have some little bits coming off. Now those poppies are a little bit more like they're in the foreground in front of me. I've sat down in the field, not liking this big blob here. It's taking my eye away from the focus. So let's take that off. There we go. See how easy it is to do this. There we go. The green has merged into this big blob here. It's splattered here, so I'm not worried about that. Quite happy with that. Can leave that well alone. You could even maybe go that way, make it into a stem. Make some random marks somewhere in the middle. The more random the better, really. So over here we could suggest there's some grass. Maybe over here as well. Now, a little blob of green just went over there. Get my cup out of the way. So just quickly lift him off. Not going to scrub away, just going to leave that well alone. Now you can pick and choose what you want to do now. You've got some stems over here from these poppies. Very light little suggestion. Don't try and follow those lines you've already got with the masking fluid. Just a few lines here and there. Maybe some of these bigger blobs in the middle, you can just suggest that they are a poppy by giving them a stem. These ones are smudged, so we're not worrying about those too much, but we can still add some lines in. Now, liking that, that's lovely. Yep, happy with that. So you can carry on. You could go for ages, you could add some greys in. That bluey grey we had earlier, you can throw that on this stem, add some darks in, but then we'll be here for hours, so we don't want to do that. So these are nicely dry. I'm going to pop back in with that lovely dark mix that I had. So the only time I've used ultramarine blue on this picture because it is much darker than cerulean. A little bit of red, making that violet colour. Pick up some yellow, that makes it the muddy colour. Keep working at it till you get what you want. It's dark grey, a bluey grey, a reddy grey. You decide, but you're putting three primaries together to get a nice deep dark. There we go. Now on these flowers, let's just zoom into those again. There we go. You can see where the original dark we put in has beautifully softened and spread out. So I'm now going to go back into that area. Remember, this is really dry now. and just suggest the middle of a poppy. Again, you could be careful and paint this properly, but I'm not going to do that. But you could, if you wanted to, get yourself a reference picture. These are completely out of my head. These poppies, have no idea what they would look like in reality. So I've probably overdone the fiddling in the middle of those flowers, but all that was the three primaries mixed into a nice grey-black. Ta-da, there we go. Would you put that into these poppies on the background? You might want to just try it somewhere, just see what a couple of random dots of black will do. That one's still damp, so it's spread out. You might overdo it because you wouldn't see much detail in these, but it's your picture. So do what you think you'd like to do. So now, going back to these trees in the background, see, I've called them trees, that's what they are. Let me show you what I mean. So this random bloom effect that's come over here and over here, I mean, I absolutely love that. That for me is why you paint with watercolour, is this beautiful random effects. So I would probably, if it was just me, I'd leave them, but I'm doing a tutorial and I'd like you to see what happens if I fiddle with it and try something else, because it might go horribly wrong, in which case you don't need to do it. So I'm going to just put some more shadowy background areas around. I'm not going to obliterate these because I like them, but I'm just going to see how that would look. So I'll just come back out a little bit, get my paints ready, and then you can watch me make it or break it. Right, let's have a go with this. So I've got some mixed up grey again, which I've done with cerulean blue and cadmium red, exactly the same grey as I used along here when it was damp in the background. So I've gone in close here. So my first technique is to gonna try and dry brush towards the middle here. So I've got some paint on here, get rid of the excess until it starts to break. Then let's see, it's very hard in a space that size, not quite working. Let's just take it the other way then. There we go, a little bit of a break there. This may be suggesting some trees, foliage, something going on there. Jury's out on that one. Let's try a slightly different way on this side. So let's suggest that there's some foliage here and it's coming round behind whatever's going on there. But it's not going to go over there because there's a nice soft background. Can you see that? Not going to cover that up. Maybe going to add some darks in here a little bit. Not covering up the whole of the area. Got a bit more space to work here. Brush is a bit wet. Break it up so it's not just a big solid grey. Try and dry. It would be easier if it was rough paper to dry, to get that dry brush technique, but you get the idea. You can do some suggestions of something going on texture wise there. So those background really faded areas have sort of really gone way behind now because we've suggested this is a lot more forward. This is probably too strong. So a quick way of getting that to loosen up is a little bit of damp cloth. Literally lift that out a little bit. Immediately a bit softer, isn't it? There we go. Now I'm in danger of fiddling too much now. So let's just come back and look at the whole picture. Yeah, that's given it a bit of interest. I could, because this is an exercise in trying, and this is what I encourage you to do, is keep experimenting. Don't be afraid to get things wrong. This is the piece of paper. What's the worst that can happen? I could ruin it. Oh no! Oh, I'll just paint another one. So let me think, shall we have some little tree marks? A bit too fiddly I'm thinking, but we'll say these trees in the background. I've got a bit more going on, perhaps they've got a trunk coming out of there behind this foreground shrubbery, whatever it is. Or maybe that's just a tangle of branches in here. You probably wouldn't see that standing out too much. I know it will dry paler, but it's still too much. Just lift it out. Simple as that, lift it out. There we go. You could, and I know this won't work, you could suggest some sort of branches coming on out of the middle of these. As I would think that these are broom or something, I don't know. That just looks a little bit contrived to me. Could soften the edges of them on the ground here. Could even perhaps take that grey line over, suggest the horizon a bit more obviously. But too contrived, it's getting too fiddly, isn't it? And it's taking away from these. So I would stop there. And you know what they looked like before I fiddled, and you can decide whether that looks more interesting or whether those naturally occurring blooms where the paint ran back into a drying wash are actually nice enough on their own to leave well alone. So I've done all the messing about, so you don't have to if you don't want to. It's interesting just to try. So I'm going to get this dry, maybe a quick hairdryer blast to speed it up, which generally I would tell you don't do, because let the paint dry naturally, get way more interesting effects. Just noticed a big blob of water there. There we go. And then we'll take off the background masking tape and see what it looks like when we finished. Okay, here we go. I'm going to take off masking tape. So I've got a video about masking tape if you're interested in some of the tips and tricks, although as I found out when I made the video, there's just no telling with masking tape. Use it at your peril. However, it leaves a lovely edge. If you don't do anything else with this picture, you just have it in your collection of pictures in a pile, it just looks nicer when you have this lovely white edge on it. And it's really good if you make this whole idea a lot smaller, say on an A5 piece of watercolour paper. If you haven't got A5, do what I do, is cut the bigger sheets down. So you can see here I've got a cutting mat. This is a very, very inexpensive cutting mat, and you buy a craft knife and it means you can cut things down and get them square very easily. Then you can make your own greetings cards, etc. So even if you never frame any of your pictures, which I really hope you do, then you can at least present them so that they look nice. One of my learners painted a very similar picture to this and put a soldier on as a silhouette, and it was absolutely fabulous, his picture, and he's framed it and it's hanging in his home, which is really nice to see and hear. So let's just take all this away so you can just see the picture in its glory. So I'm quite happy with that. If you compare it with the one we started with, very different feel, and we've got barley and single poppy. This one is very much about the poppies. It's not an accurate picture by any means. It's just a quick whiz round a picture of poppies in a field, and with some background interest and various different colour mixes. I've gone with a much greyer sky, which I really, really like, and actually the cool blue of the sky sets off the warm red of the poppies quite nicely. So that's I would definitely use that again. So if you're going to sign your work, which please do sign it, because it's your piece of work, however much you don't want to, You can sign it in pencil, you can sign it in pen, or you can use a fine liner, which you've already got out anyway. So how would I do this? Well, my tip to you, if you're going to sign it, is go to your palette and all the colours you've got on here, don't use anything else, use the colours you've already got on your picture. You can, I tend to just go over on the right hand side. I'm going to go with the grey that I had, maybe with a bit of green, a greeny grey. Let's go for greeny grey because it's in the foreground and there's some green over here. Rather than doing a bright green signature, I'll do a greeny grey one. And then I'm just going to do a very simple one where I can see it. So my J, and let's just, this one will have a big S. Look, there we go, big S. Now some people don't put the date on because they point out if you want to sell it later, you can pretend you painted it any time or entered a competition with it, which is a really good point as long as you haven't shown it publicly anywhere. I do put the date on because I always find it really useful to go back and check what my paintings were like and when did I paint that. So for me, I always put my date and my signature on, and something I've started to do recently is flip it over and on the back give it a title so that you know what it's called in the future, because I did have a few of my paintings in different places with different names on them. It's the same painting, which was slightly embarrassing. So anyway, that's the finished painting. As I say, it's my paintings. I hope you'll take it your own way and maybe just do a small part of it. Maybe just these little poppies here, there's just nice little corner there which you could do very simply, and hopefully you have some happy accidents of your own that you can then play with and ruin, or no, not really, that you can then adjust if you want to, or leave well alone. So I hope you enjoyed that demonstration. So I hope you enjoyed that poppy field exercise. You can do that on any size piece of paper, any type of paper. Please don't try and copy my exact technique because you will come unstuck. You are you, and you cannot paint like me, and I cannot paint like you. So make sure you go your own way. You could see with me that things happened I wasn't expecting. I was using a different paper, and that's watercolour. Just go with it, enjoy it, and don't fight it. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. If you're struggling with all the backgrounds and everything, just focus on a poppy and let the paint do some work for you and enjoy it. And I'd love to see some of them, so please do send them to me. You can email me at dunnockstudio@gmail.com. Visit my website and generally get in touch. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Dunnock Studio, and keep in touch. It'd be lovely to hear from you. Bye for now, take care, happy painting.